So another book, as Shiva mentioned, I've written recently is called Relational Judaism. So every time I speak, and I think every program we should have these 3 or 4 minute relational moments where we get to meet somebody when we come to a great place like the JCC of San Francisco. I hope you'll continue to share your stories with each other and with the people you meet throughout the workshops, with these wonderful speakers, and with the resources, the fantastic resources outside. And I know there'll be many, many good takeaways for us as we face these issues. So I have learned a great deal about death and dying from watching my loved ones face death. We're at this great JCC. The JCC in Omaha, Nebraska saved the life of my father-in-law. His name was Abe Kukafka, and his daughter, the woman I married and have been married to for 47 years, Susie Kukafka Wolfson, is right here in the audience. Can you give her a nice warm welcome? Susie's father stood 4'8". He was a little Polish guy from a little village on the east coast of Poland called Slavitich. And when the Nazis invaded from the west, his mother said to him, go east, go into Russia. And he survived World War II, and after World War II, he met Hildegard Liebal. They got married. They had a little baby, Susie, known as Sura. She was born in Germany. And in 1951, the family immigrated to Omaha, Nebraska. Now, Abe never got a break in business, so he worked in a factory making hydraulic pumps his whole life. And when he turned 65, he retired from the Sperry Rand Corporation, this factory, and Susie and I bought him a membership at the Omaha Jewish Community Center Health Club. I understand you have a great health club here, and there's a great health club in Omaha. And that is where Abe Kukafka went every day the rest of his life. He loved that health club. He would go every day, did every exercise class. He would work out like a fiend. He would take his shower. He'd sit in his beloved schwitz. You know what a schwitz is? The steam bath. And then after that, he made his cup of coffee and he walked into the foyer above the indoor swimming pool and a big round table where he and his friends sat to kibitz. Do you know the word kibitz? Kibitz is the Yiddish for converse, to just catch up with each other. These guys called themselves the men of the round table. And every day after their workouts, they sat and talked. When Abe was 85 years old, his heart valve was giving out. And he had open heart surgery at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, where Susie and I had moved. And he was upset because the doctors put in a pig valve. He called it Trefafufu Chazer. That means in Yiddish, not kosher. They told Abe that this new pig valve in his heart would last 10 years. But Abe could breathe again. He went right back to his workout exercising. 10 years later, he's 95 years old. And Susie and I got a call to run quick to Omaha, where Abe was in the hospital dying of heart failure. The valve was giving out. The doctors there basically said, what do you want? You're 95. There's nothing more we can do. But Abe told us he didn't want to die. He said, take me to Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic is the famous destination medicine place in Rochester, Minnesota. So we checked Abe out of the hospital. We drove him 5 hours overnight to Rochester, Minnesota. The next morning, a young female cardiologist in this world-famous medical facility with every test imaginable, every machine imaginable, walked into Abe's room and asked to see his hand. Abe held out his hand, and the doctor looked at his fingernails and said, Mr. Kukafka, you have an infection in your heart. They're called splinter hemorrhages. And the doctor could tell without even a blood test that Abe was in trouble. So they put him through all kinds of tests, and then they had him meet a world-famous heart surgeon. at 95 years old, who took one look at Abe and said, listen, if we don't replace the heart valve, you will die. But you're in such good physical shape at age 95 from all the exercising at the JCC. If you can clear up the heart infection, I will do a second open heart surgery for you at the age of 95. So they put in a PICC line. You know what a PICC line is? It's a line that goes directly into your heart for antibiotics. And Susie and I drove him back to Omaha for the 3 weeks it would take to clear up the heart infection. Do you know what Abe Kukofka did in those 3 weeks? He bought himself a new car. Oh, sure, he worked out. But he bought himself a new car and insisted on a 10-year warranty. And when we got him back to the Mayo Clinic for his second open heart surgery at the age of 95, the night before the surgery, the surgeon came in to see us, and Abe told him the story. Mr. Doctor, I bought myself a new car. I got a 10-year warranty. I want the same deal on the new heart valve. Well, he survived the operation, and he was back at the JCC in no time. And even though he lived at the adjacent Jewish Home for the Aging, he had a little scooter, and he would drive himself over to the health club. And people would say to him, Abe, what's the secret to living so long? And he would say in his wonderful Polish accent, listen, you know, there's a Malach HaMavis. Malach HaMavis is Yiddish for angel of death. This angel of death, he's got a quota every day. He's got to bring in a certain number of people. But this Malach HaMavis, this angel of death, he's a kind of lazy guy. So if he sees you're sitting on the couch eating potato chips, watching television, he thinks, easy catch. But if you're moving, if you're exercising, if you're living life to the fullest, the Malach HaMavis says, I'm not going to run after him. I'll get him another day. So keep moving. That's my secret. Keep moving. Abe kept moving for another 5 years. We had a marvelous 100th birthday party for him. And 2 months later, he walked to the JCC, into the health club, did his workout, took his shower, went into the schwitz, fell asleep, and the Malach HaMavis finally caught up with Abe. On his gravestone at Bethel Cemetery in Omaha, Nebraska, we inscribed 2 words underneath his name: keep moving. My mother was the opposite. She didn't fight death, she ignored it. Her name was Bernice, and she was too busy running things to let illness get in her way. Even when she could barely walk, she would run our family and her businesses from her lift chair by telephone. She refused to give up her self-appointed role as commander-in-chief of our mishpacha, our family. Even with my father, who not only never wrote a check, he never bought himself a shirt, never picked out his clothes to wear. He would tell him what to do every day. I once heard my mother yell at my father, Alan, put on a sweater. And my dad answered, are we going out or am I cold? That tells you everything you need to know about their relationship. Susie and I were at a wedding in Indianapolis when my brother Doug called and said, come quick. Mom was in a delirium. Her heart rate was 240 beats per minute. And even though she was in a kind of a coma, they did a CAT scan, and when the doctor pointed out shadows on her lungs and her abdomen and the back of her neck, we suspected the worst. Is it cancer, we asked? We can't tell for sure unless there's a biopsy, the doctor said. Somehow Mom came out of the delirium, and we had a week with her to say our goodbyes, to share our memories, to thank her, to tell her we loved her. I'll never forget my father's last words to her. You did a good job, babe. He always called her babe. She reluctantly had the biopsy, so her 3 boys would know what she had: pancreatic cancer. At the funeral, her doctor confessed to us, you know, your mom refused all tests. no mammograms, no scans. She didn't want to know. And even if she did, she told me more than once, I don't want any treatments. I've lived a wonderful life. I have a wonderful husband, wonderful kids and grandkids, and a wonderful family, and that's enough for me. And what are we to do? The loved ones who desperately want to comfort the dying. As my colleague Rabbi Elliot Dorff teaches, Jewish legal tradition holds that one may not hasten the dying process, but you also do not have to put impediments that delay death. Jewish authorities today offer a spectrum of responses to the difficult questions concerning the technologies that can prolong life. You can find authorities who insist that all measures must be taken to preserve life, and you can find those who argue that feeding tubes and breathing machines interfere with the natural order and are not required. You can find some rabbis who say that once measures are taken to prolong a life, say a feeding tube, you cannot remove it. And other rabbis who say that artificial nutrition is a kind of medicine and can be removed so nature takes its course. What everyone agrees to is that as a patient, it's extraordinarily important to have an advance directive, to make your wishes known to family and doctors, and that friends and family be present so that the dying are never left alone. There's no greater mitzvah, no greater obligation, no greater good deed than to comfort the dying and the mourner. When my Zaidi, my grandfather, died, I wanted to do anything to honor his life. I had studied Jewish texts about death and dying in college, and I told my shocked parents that even though I was officially not a mourner according to Jewish tradition, I wanted to be a shomer, a guardian of Zaidi's body before the funeral. Usually this task falls to someone at the mortuary, but I didn't want a stranger to watch over Zaidi. I wanted to be there. And so I grabbed a siddur, a prayer book, and a Bible, and I showed up at the mortuary. When my brothers and cousins heard about this, they too came in shifts throughout the night to sit by Zaidi's coffin. And when I saw my mother at the funeral the next day, the look of gratitude on her face was incredible. Do you know what the Hebrew word for funeral is? It's lavaya. But it doesn't mean funeral. It means to accompany, to be with, to be there. And that's why it's such an enormous mitzvah, an enormous good deed to attend a funeral, because that in and of itself is a huge comfort to the mourners and an honor for the deceased. By being present at a funeral, you can say the traditional words of Jewish comfort, Hamakom yinachem etchem betoch sha'ar v'lei Tzion v'Yerushalayim, which means, may God comfort you among all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And you can do one other ultimate mitzvah at a funeral. You can help bury the dead by physically participating in the burial, placing dirt on the coffin. You may have seen this at a Jewish funeral. The rabbis considered this the ultimate altruistic mitzvah because this is one mitzvah, one good deed that cannot be repaid. When I wrote my book on Time to Mourn, A Time to Comfort, I spoke to dozens of people about their experiences with death and dying and comforting. And the most anguished of comments were about how difficult it was for people to say something comforting to the mourner. You've been there. You don't know what to say that will be a comfort to someone who's mourning. Some people say exactly the wrong thing. At least she's not suffering. It could have been worse. He saw the bar mitzvah. You're young. Jewish tradition is so smart about this. It teaches us to say those traditional words of comfort I just recited to you, or say nothing at all. Just be there. Let the mourner talk, or not. Busy yourself with helping the mourners do their grief work. Do some shopping for them. Make a meal for them. Take the kids so they have some respite. Centuries before Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and other experts on grief, the rabbis understood the psychology of mourning. They provide a path through the process that's so incredibly sound and insightful. The first stage after death is called aninut, a period of shock when nearly all religious obligations are nullified and the mourner is instructed to simply take care of the funeral arrangements. After the funeral, the period of Shiva. Shiva means 7. So traditionally, the 7 days of intense mourning. Actually, the first 3 are even more intense than the rest of the 7 days. When you don't go to work, and you don't run errands, and you don't entertain others. You're cared for. Food is brought to you. The minyan is brought to you. The community surrounds you with love and memory. And at the end of this period, you literally get up from the Shiva and walk outside, a demonstration that you're ready to ease back into your regular life. And then Shloshim, which means 30 days of somewhat less intensity, and the daily recitation of the mourner's prayer, the Kaddish. And then for parents, 11 months of saying Kaddish. And then the annual memorial called a Yortzeit, the anniversary of the death. And then 4 opportunities during the year called Yizkor, to remember the deceased. Yizkor literally means remembering. It's such a smart and effective path of mourning. That's why it's such a loss when the mourning process is shortchanged. When Susie and I fell pregnant in our early 20s, we were as excited as young prospective parents could be. And our parents were eagerly anticipating becoming the grandparents for the first time they were meant to be. We took the Mazel Tov class. In Mazel Tov, you don't learn to say he, you say oi, oi, oi. We met with the doctors and the nurses, and nobody, not once, did anyone say anything about things that might go wrong, terribly wrong. On May 6, 1974, our first child was born and died 13 hours later. She had a condition called Meconium Aspiration and never had a chance. Meconium aspiration, when the baby ingests contaminated fluid through the struggles of labor. And she didn't have a chance. And no one knew how to handle this in 1974. The nurses moved Susie from the maternity floor to the urology floor so she wouldn't have to hear the sounds of babies. The OBGYN came into our room and said, gee, I'm sorry for what happened, but we had to do an emergency cesarean section. I have to charge you an extra $350. That's what he said. Even our beloved rabbi came into the hospital room and said, listen, I'm terribly sorry for your loss. The cantor will be by to pick up the baby and have the baby buried in the cemetery. What, I cried? No funeral? No Shiva? No mourning? No, the rabbi explained, according to strict Jewish law, if a baby doesn't survive 30 days, there is to be no funeral, no Shiva, no mourning. Right. No mourning, no grieving. I suppose the reasoning at the time of the rabbis was there was so much infant mortality that they thought they were doing the mourners a favor by considering it as if the pregnancy never happened. But we know better. And thank God, since then, most rabbis will perform a funeral or permit mourning in some fashion, even for miscarriages. Thankfully for us, we moved to Southern California just after the baby died, and Susie found a support group of mothers who had experienced neonatal death. They met at Stephen S. Wise Synagogue, and she slowly worked through her grief. I, of course, did exactly the wrong thing by insisting we would get through this, and we'll get pregnant again. You know, the T-shirt is correct. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. But we gradually came through it, And 2 years later, our daughter Javi was born, and 2 years after that, our son Michael. Great joys in our life. But to this day, on May 6th, I say Kaddish. And Susie and I have been called to counsel parents who experience this terrible, unexpected loss. You know, I'm often asked if Judaism has a belief in life after death. Certainly, there are many allusions to heaven in rabbinic literature, and there are those who imagine that soul lives on beyond the grave. But the overwhelming emphasis in Judaism is on life before death. I wrote about this in another book I wrote called The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven, Reviewing and Renewing Your Life on Earth. You know, the rabbis through the centuries have imagined that when you get to heaven, you'll be asked questions about how you lived your life on earth. It's a way to kind of do a spiritual inventory that in Hebrew we call cheshbon hanefesh. If you're in Israel and you go to a restaurant, at the end of the meal, what do you get? You get a cheshbon, a bill. And nefesh is the word for soul. So it's a kind of a spiritual accounting of the soul, cheshbon hanefesh. It's what we do on the holiday of Yom Kippur, which is, for me, by far the most wonderful Jewish holiday I experience every year. I do all these unbelievable, terrific practices to get me in the place of cheshbon hanefesh, of spiritual accounting. I spend most of 25 hours in the synagogue studying or praying. I don't wear leather because it's a sign of luxury, so I wear tennis shoes to the synagogue. I don't bathe, shave, or wear cologne. I don't have intimate relations with Susie. She doesn't mind because I don't bathe, shave, or wear cologne. A neighbor of mine goes one step further. He wears a white robe to the synagogue. You know what that is? That's a kittel. That's the burial shroud that all Jews are buried in. You wear that white kittel to the synagogue because on Yom Kippur, it's a kind of rehearsal of death. It's the moment we'll be asked questions about how we lived our lives on earth. And we do that every year. One of my favorites of the 7 questions I wrote about comes from the father of modern Orthodoxy in the 19th century. His name was Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. He lived in Germany, and it said that on his deathbed, his students gathered around him and asked if there was anything they could do for him. To their shock and surprise, Rabbi Hirsch said, "Yes, take me to Switzerland." The students were shocked. They couldn't believe it. But Rabbi, you're so ill, you're so frail. Why do you want to go to Switzerland? And Rabbi Hirsch is said to have replied, "Because soon I will meet the Almighty. And what will I say when I'm asked, 'Did you see my Alps?' Did you see my Alps? Did you take advantage of everything permitted to you while you were on earth?" That's one of the 7 questions you're asked in heaven. This is the bucket list question. Did you see that movie with Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman called The Bucket List? You know, 2 guys know they're going to die and they make a list of things they want to do before they die. There's a great art project out in the lobby. You all have to write it out. Before I die, I want to. So these guys make a list, a bucket list of things they want to do. And this comes out of an entire literature of books you may know. There are books, there's a whole shelf of books. 1001 things to do before you die. 1001 places to visit before you die. 1001 recordings to hear before you die. 1001 movies to see before you die. These are all real books. My favorite is 1001 senior moments, of which we could only remember 242. That's a real book. Judaism encourages us to do what we're permitted to do, everything we're permitted to do, except that one day of year on Yom Kippur, where we rehearse our deaths, we do our spiritual inventory, and then when we're weak and famished at the end of this day, we run to family and friends for a break fast. We break our fast with friends and family, and the best break fasts in the United States of America are my cousins Don and Nancy Greenberg in Omaha, Nebraska. Why? Because they import for 125 guests every break fast, every Yom Kippur break fast. They've done this now for 35 years. For 125 guests, they import smoked fish from Barney Greengrass in New York City into landlocked Jews in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm telling you, whitefish like this, and Nova lox, and you can't believe, pickled lox and pickled herring and cream sauce, and all kinds of fantastic fish from Barney Greengrass, and everyone loves it. I was once in Barney Greengrass for a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, I wanted to meet Mo Greengrass, the owner of Barney Greengrass, and he was this big guy. He was sitting behind his counter next to the cash register, all kinds of papers in front of him. He wants to pay no attention to me, but I like to meet people. How many of you met me today before I got up to speak? Yeah, I love that. So I go up to this guy, Mr. Greengrass, and I say to him, his head's down like this. I say to him, listen, Mr. Greengrass, you don't know me. I'm Ron Wolfson from Los Angeles, but I think you know my cousins, Don and Nancy Greenberg from Omaha, Nebraska. And as soon as I said Don and Nancy Greenberg, this man slowly lifted his head, looked me in the eye and said, good account. 9104 Davenport, Omaha, Nebraska, 68114. Good account. The goal of Yom Kippur, the goal of spiritual accounting, the goal we should all have, not when we get to heaven, but every day. Rabbi Eliezer taught, repent, return, teshuvah. Do teshuvah one day before you die. Good idea, there's only one problem with that. Who knows what that day is? So Rabbi Eliezer continues, repent, return, teshuvah every day, lest tomorrow is that day. There are two more things we can do as we face the end of days. I once interviewed a woman named Carol who told me about the most powerful experience of her life. She and her sister Diane had a terrible falling out early in their adulthood. One day, Carol, who lived in New York City, got a surprise phone call from Diane in Chicago. I'm dying and I need to see you. I'm so sorry about what I did and I beg you to forgive me. Please come. They had not seen each other in 40 years. Carol told me her initial inclination was to hang up the phone, but she didn't. She got on the first plane and flew to Chicago, to Diane's bedside, where the two sisters spent a week together, sharing the stories of their lives, reconciling, forgiving each other. Carol was there when Diane took her last breath, confident that she had died in peace. And Carol told me that she felt like a huge boulder had been removed from her heart. Forgiveness is a great gift to give the dying and the living. One last story. 3 days after my mother died, my brother Bob and I were looking through a little blue notebook where she kept all her important information. As I told you, she ran the family. So there were bank accounts and insurance numbers and all kinds of important people and their phone numbers. And just as we were closing the book up, we noticed that in the inside flap of this little blue notebook was a single white envelope. And it had, in my mother's beautiful handwriting, one word on it, important. My brother Doug, our brother Doug was not there, so we decided not to open it at that moment. We said, let's wait till Doug is with us at the Shiva tonight. And after the Shiva minyan, after the service, we'll read this. We'll open this up and find out what's in it. So all day long, I'm wondering, what could possibly be in this? Did my mother have a secret bank account in Switzerland? Or, were there instructions on who should get what? Or what was in this letter? So that night after the service, we went, the three of us, into a room and we opened it up. And we discovered the most beautiful letter I've ever read in my entire life. And with your permission, I'd like to share it with you. It was in her beautiful handwriting on stationery that said, Bernice Wolfson. To my dear sons. She never thought she would die first. My father was a heart patient for years and years and years. So she wrote this letter to her dear sons. First of all, I love you, and I'm proud of all three of you. As I write this, my heart fills with pride for your roles as devoted husbands, and particularly your roles as wonderful fathers. This, of course, is the greatest gift a child can give a parent. Someday, when you read this, you will also be reminded that as a parent, another great gift you have given me is the comfort of knowing you care for each other, and that you will be there for each other if you need to be. My simple request is that you talk to each other often after your mother is no longer here to keep you posted. Please keep in touch with Doug. He has a very special challenge in his life and needs the support of people who love and understand him. You have filled my life with pleasure, and the most I can wish for you is that your children do the same for you. I love you, Ron, Bob, and Doug, and thank you for giving my life so much meaning. And it's signed, your mother. Is that gorgeous or what? It is the most beautiful gift I think I've ever received in my life. It's a kind of ethical will. You know what ethical will is? When you write down your thoughts, your values, the things you want your descendants to know. And it's more than that. It's a love letter that says everything a mother wanted to say to her boys. I love you. I'm proud of you. Please stay in relationship with each other. I hope you can write a letter like this to your loved ones. It's one of the most wonderful and important things you can do to help others, especially at the end of their lives. So as we move to the remainder of this extraordinary day, let's remember to be present for each other, to learn the words of comfort, to think carefully about these challenging end-of-life issues, and to resolve to keep moving and to enjoy everything we are blessed with in this life and on this earth, to reach for reconciliation and forgiveness with each other and for ourselves, and to share with the next generation the values that have shaped our lives. So thank you for inviting me to share with you today, and may God bless and comfort you always. Thank you so much. Did you have a question, sir?
I did. None of my business, but you read it out loud, and I'm really curious to know what was the problem with Doug.
Yes, thank you. Douglas, my youngest brother, has 3 children, and his youngest was born with a chromosomal defect that has rendered him speechless. He cannot speak. He is the sweetest, most loving human being I've ever met in my life, but he has no language. He's now 27 years old, and he lives at home. My brother is basically retired and is his caregiver. Avi is his name. Avi had the most extraordinary bar mitzvah I've ever seen in my career. When Susie and I got the invitation for his bar mitzvah at Temple Israel in Omaha, Nebraska, we couldn't believe it. I said to Susie, how is he going to have a bar mitzvah? He can't speak a word. But what happened was, first of all, the synagogue was packed the morning of his bar mitzvah, you can imagine. He had a brand new suit on. He came onto the pulpit. The rabbi, Aryeh Azriel, explained to everybody that Avi had no language, but he had worked with his teachers to create artistic representations of the prayers. So when the Shema was recited, he had a Shema pillowcase that he had decorated. When the Avot Nimahot, the Amida, he had a family tree. When the prayer for Yotzer, for creation, he had made a picture of what he thought of as creation. And as the prayers were recited, he would come to the middle of the pulpit and show everybody. Everybody was so thrilled that he did that. And it was a fantastic bar mitzvah. So Doug has really devoted his life to caring for Avi, and he's just a gorgeous. In fact, Doug and Avi are in Israel as we speak. He took him to Israel with his family. Just a fabulous guy. So my mom always said to us, I go all over the world speaking. My brother Bob, for 18 years, was the Anti-Defamation League director in Omaha, Nebraska. Then for 10 years, he worked with Abe Foxman in New York as the head of all the regions of the Anti-Defamation League. And my mother, on her deathbed, said to me, the real hero is my son, Doug. And I couldn't agree more. That's what's so special about Douglas. So thank you all for coming. And I have one copy of my book here. It's called A Time to Mourn, A Time to Comfort. You can get it on Amazon. And most importantly, enjoy the rest of the day. It's a very powerful day. And thanks to the San Francisco JCC for organizing it. Bye-bye. להתראות.